My name is Charlotte Hayes, and for most of my life, I was the invisible one in my own family. It wasn't something anyone said directly. It was in the way my father looked right past me, like I was the empty space between my two brothers. Nick was the firstborn, the golden boy, with a charming grin and a mind for business. Brandon was the youngest, the star athlete, all-state soccer champ before he was 17. And then there was me, the middle child, the quiet one, the artsy daughter who kept to herself and never made a fuss. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Photos of football games, framed certificates, group hugs in the backyard. But if you paid attention, you'd notice something missing: me. I remember being 7, sitting at the kitchen table with glitter stuck to my fingers and a hand-drawn card in front of me. I had worked on it all day, carefully cutting, pasting, even writing a poem by myself. It was Father's Day. I waited until after dinner, my heart pounding like it might burst. I handed it to Dad with a smile too big for my face. He looked at it for half a second. "Thanks," he muttered, already reaching for the TV remote. 5 minutes later, Nick strolled in and tossed him a store-bought mug that said "One Dad." My father laughed like someone had just handed him a gold medal. "That's my boy," he said. I sat there, still holding the card I made, wondering why my effort didn't matter, wondering what I was missing. That pattern never changed. Nick's business ideas, even the ones sketched on napkins, were genius. Brandon's average performances on the field were cause for a celebration. My perfect report cards. A nod, maybe. My art contest wins. Barely a glance. Dinner conversations were always about the boys. Dad would ask about their grades, their plans, their friends. He never once asked about mine. If I tried to speak up, he'd give a polite smile and change the subject. My mom tried to keep things balanced. She'd give me quiet hugs in the hallway and whisper, "You're special too, sweetheart." But even she couldn't change the weight of the room. When Nick wanted the last slice of pizza, he got it. When Brandon needed cash for something important, Dad handed it over, no questions asked. I once asked for a new sketchbook. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Why? You'll quit halfway like everything else." That one cut deep, deeper than I let anyone see. I stopped trying to impress him after that. Not out of defiance, out of exhaustion. But something else started to grow inside me. Not sadness, something sharper. Determination. And one day, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would become someone he couldn't ignore, even if I had to do it alone. Nick and Brandon were born to shine. At least, that's how my father always made it seem. Nick, the eldest, was the smooth talker. He could charm teachers, neighbors, and bank managers with the same smile. Even when he didn't study, he somehow talked his way into decent grades. Dad treated him like a business prodigy, bragging about how Nick was going places. They had their own jokes, fishing trips, and even a special handshake from when Nick was 10. I once watched from the hallway as Nick showed Dad a business plan scribbled on a diner napkin. Dad looked at him like he'd just invented the light bulb. "You've got the brain of a leader," he said, beaming. Then there was Brandon, Dad's athlete. From Little League to varsity soccer, Brandon had trophies lined up like soldiers on a shelf. Dad went to every game, rain or shine. He shouted from the sidelines like a coach who believed every goal was a family legacy. When Brandon scored the winning goal in a regional final, Dad threw a backyard party. Music, barbecue, half the neighborhood showed up. I helped clean up afterward, of course. That was my usual role. I was there, always there. But it was like being on the wrong side of a one-way mirror. When I got into the advanced art program at school, I told them over breakfast. Dad didn't even put down his coffee. "Honors, huh? That's nice." That was it. I studied late into the night. I worked part-time at a coffee shop to buy my own supplies. I taught myself graphic design. I built a small online portfolio before I turned 18. But no matter what I did, it never earned more than a glance. Meanwhile, Brandon sprained his ankle at practice and got a get-well cake. I wasn't jealous of their success. I was just tired of being erased. They weren't cruel. They never told me to be quiet. They just filled the space so loudly that there was no room left for me. But I learned something from watching them soak up all the praise. I didn't need to be louder. I just needed to be undeniable. I stopped chasing his approval the day I realized I was running in circles. It didn't happen with some dramatic outburst or a slammed door. No, my rebellion was quiet, intentional. The kind that simmers beneath the surface until it reshapes everything. While my brothers basked in praise and attention, I buried myself in work. I took on double shifts at the coffee shop, enrolled in evening classes, and taught myself coding on an old, beat-up laptop. I started freelancing small design projects, logos, flyers, app interfaces. At night, while the rest of the house was dark, I sat under the yellow glow of my desk lamp, fingers moving faster than my thoughts. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about becoming someone who mattered, at least to myself. I built a basic prototype for a digital product platform that connected local freelancers with small businesses in real time. I called it Linkwell. It was clunky and slow, but it was mine. And I kept working on it day after day, week after week, improving every detail with the care of someone sculpting their own future out of scraps. Then, finally, came a small win. I was accepted into a competitive tech accelerator. Less than 5% of applicants made it through. I remember sitting at the dinner table that night, heart pounding as I casually said, "So I got into something big. A startup accelerator. It's a tech incubator in the city. They fund early-stage companies." Dad didn't even look up from his plate. That's good. "Hey Brandon, did that recruiter ever get back to you?" It was like I hadn't spoken at all. I stared at the plate in front of me, watching steam rise from the mashed potatoes. For a moment, I thought I might cry, but instead, I smiled. That smile scared me, because it wasn't sadness anymore. It was resolve. I excused myself early, went to my room, and opened my laptop. I started reworking my pitch deck that very night. That was the moment I realized the applause I was waiting for would never come, not from him. And I didn't need it anymore. What I needed was a reason to keep building something stronger than longing, deeper than anger. I was no longer trying to earn a seat at their table. I was building my own. The launch day was everything I had dreamed of, and everything I had feared. It was held in a glass-walled conference room downtown, nothing extravagant, but elegant enough to feel real. Investors showed up, local press, a handful of curious business owners. My tiny team wore matching black shirts with the Linkwell logo printed across the chest. My palms were sweating, my voice shaky, but I stepped up to that podium like I belonged there. I spoke about the mission behind the platform, about helping small businesses connect faster, smarter, about how I knew what it was like to be a name no one remembered, a message no one returned, and how this platform would change that. I looked out at a room full of strangers who were actually listening. And for the first time I felt seen, not as someone's daughter, not as Nick's sister or Brandon's quiet sibling, but as Charlotte Hayes, founder and CEO. The presentation ended with polite applause that grew into real enthusiasm. People came up afterward with questions, compliments, even business cards. A local investor asked for a meeting the following week. My team hugged me. Someone opened a bottle of sparkling cider. For the first time in my life, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I had finally created something my father couldn't brush aside. I was wrong. That weekend, we had a family dinner. I hadn't planned to bring it up, but when Dad started praising Nick's new condo deal and Brandon's latest gym sponsorship, I thought just maybe it was time. "I launched Linkwell last week," I said. "We already have our first round of investors interested. It went really well." Dad looked at me like I had mentioned the weather. Yes, you've always been busy," he said, waving his hand. "Anyway, Brandon, how's that hamstring? You still doing therapy?" And just like that, I was erased again. It felt like someone had turned down the volume on my existence, like I was yelling into a canyon that refused to echo. I sat through the rest of dinner smiling politely, but something in me had shifted. Not broken, just finished. I didn't cry when I got home. I didn't scream or throw anything. I opened my laptop, and I kept building. Because I finally understood his silence wasn't my failure. It was his limitation. After that dinner, I stopped trying. Not in the way that means giving up, but in the way that means letting go of things that were never mine to fix. I no longer needed to prove anything to him. I didn't need applause. I didn't need permission. I needed freedom. So I packed up my apartment in the city and moved to a small coastal town 2 hours away. The kind of place where no one knew my last name, where I could walk barefoot on the beach in the morning and work late into the night without anyone asking what I was doing. I rented a modest studio above a bookstore. My desk faced the window. Every day I sat there building Linkwell line by line, page by page, strategy by strategy. Some weeks I barely scraped by. I lived off instant noodles and black coffee. I took on side gigs editing, design, even teaching beginner coding online. There were nights I broke down under my desk, exhausted and alone. But I never quit. I learned how to fix bugs in the platform by reading forums until sunrise. I learned how to write contracts, pitch to clients, and say no when someone tried to underpay me. And slowly, one client turned into 3 into 10. I used the name Charlie Hayes for everything. A nickname, yes, but also a new identity. One that didn't carry the weight of being the forgotten daughter. One that didn't need anyone's validation to keep going. I still saw photos, sometimes Nick speaking at conferences, Brandon lifting trophies, Dad beaming beside them like they were royalty. I used to cry when I saw those. Now, I just closed the app and got back to work. Because I was building something real. Something no one could take away from me. A year passed, then another. Linkwell grew slowly but steadily. We refined the platform, rebranded, added features our competitors hadn't even thought of. A niche investor noticed our traction and offered seed funding. For the first time, I had a real team: developers, marketers, client support. People who believed in the mission, in me. We didn't grow flashy, we grew solid. And then, something unexpected happened. I found out the firm my father worked for, an old-school consulting company where he'd been a partner for decades, was being quietly acquired. The industry was shifting and their outdated methods weren't keeping up. They were losing market share fast. Guess who the lead acquiring partner turned out to be? Us, Linkwell. Through a shell company, we'd begun acquiring smaller firms with outdated systems and retrofitting them through our platform. And now, my team had their sights on this one, my father's. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest colleagues, that this acquisition meant more to me than just business. It meant closure. I signed the legal paperwork under my legal name, Charlie Hayes. No one on their end noticed. They had no reason to. I had changed everything: my name, my address, even the way I carried myself. A week before the deal closed, I walked into a luxury car dealership. It wasn't about showing off. It was about reminding myself how far I'd come. I picked out a sleek, black sedan, elegant, quiet, powerful. And then, I prepared the envelope. Inside was a single legal document, the acquisition contract that gave Linkwell majority control of the firm my father proudly bragged about for years. His job, his reputation, all now under the umbrella of the daughter he never saw. I didn't plan to humiliate him. But I wasn't going to hide anymore, either. I opened the family group chat for the first time in months. "I'll be there for Father's Day dinner," I typed. No emojis, no explanation. Just a quiet promise that this time I wasn't coming as the forgotten one. I was coming as the woman he never bothered to know. The sun was still up when I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly the same: white shutters, trimmed hedges, American flag waving gently on the porch. But something felt different. This time I wasn't arriving as someone hoping to belong. I was arriving as someone who had outgrown the need. Nick and Brandon were already outside, laughing on the patio with drinks in hand. Dad sat in his usual spot, at the head of the table, holding court like always. He looked up as I stepped out of the car. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he said with a smirk. My brothers turned, eyebrows raised. The silence was awkward, but I smiled politely. "Hi everyone, happy Father's Day, Dad." Dinner was exactly what I expected: stories of Brandon's newest fitness sponsorship, Nick's real estate projects, everyone chiming in like they were rehearsing lines from a family sitcom. I sat quietly, listened, observed. Then I stood up. "I brought something for you," I said, looking directly at my father. The room paused. He blinked. I walked out the front door and returned moments later, driving the black sedan slowly into the driveway. The engine purred like a warning. Gasps rippled through the room. "Wait, is that yours?" Nick asked, standing. I didn't respond. I walked back inside, a small black envelope in hand. I placed it on the table in front of Dad. "For you," I said. "Happy Father's Day." He raised an eyebrow, chuckling. "Did you buy me a car?" "No," I replied calmly. "Just open the envelope." He slipped the paper out. I watched his expression shift: first confusion, then disbelief, and finally pale silence. His hand trembled slightly as he read the fine print. His lips moved, silently mouthing words he clearly didn't want to believe. "What is this?" he asked sharply. "Read it carefully," I said. "It's official as of this morning." Brandon leaned in, frowning. "Wait, is that the firm?" Dad's voice rose, shaky and defensive. "You're telling me you own the company now?" "No," I said with a faint smile. "My company does. I just signed the paperwork." Silence fell across the room like a sudden storm. No one moved. No one laughed. I looked around once, then turned and walked toward the door. This time, no one stopped me, not even him. The shouting started behind me as I stepped into the car and drove away. Calm, unshaken, free. He had spent years pretending I didn't exist. And now, he worked for the name he never even bothered to learn. I didn't gloat. I didn't call anyone afterward to ask what happened next. I already knew. The silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. A man like my father, who had spent a lifetime sculpting his identity around pride and control, had just discovered that the daughter he dismissed was now the quiet force behind everything he thought he owned. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from him, not directly. But one evening, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "He's been quiet," she said. "Spends more time alone. He asked if you'd ever visit again." I didn't promise anything. I didn't say no. But I wasn't that girl anymore, waiting for crumbs of affection from a man who could never say, "I'm proud of you," unless it came with conditions. Instead, I poured a cup of tea, sat by my window, and watched the tide come in. Linkwell kept growing. We expanded to 3 new cities. I hired more staff. I spoke at conferences. And each time someone asked me how I started, I told them the truth. I was invisible for a long time, but sometimes being overlooked is the best training for becoming unstoppable. I didn't build my life to hurt anyone, but I also didn't build it to be ignored anymore. That's the thing about quiet power. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just keeps showing up, doing the work, changing everything. And on that Father's Day, I didn't just walk away from a dinner table. I walked into the life I had built for myself. One step at a time, one unreturned smile at a time. And I've never looked back. Not every story ends with applause. Sometimes the most powerful victories happen in silence, when you stop waiting for someone to choose you, and you finally choose yourself. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who claim to love you but made you feel invisible, I see you. If you've ever worked twice as hard for half the recognition, I understand you. And if you're still carrying the weight of someone's silence, hoping one day they'll say, "I'm proud of you," let me tell you something. You don't need their voice to validate your worth. You are not a background character in someone else's story. You are the author of your own. That's what Charlotte Hayes taught us. And maybe, like her, your revenge isn't loud or cruel. Maybe it's building a life so rich in purpose that the people who ignored you have no choice but to reckon with your presence. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us your moment of clarity. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. This is the art of revenge. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is becoming unforgettable.